World of Warcraft. Arguably the most documented game in history. Its antics have been witnessed by millions, with many always keeping a close eye on them, waiting to see what they do next.
Have you ever thought about adding servers for previous expansions as they were then?
Massively multiplayer online role-playing games have been around for years now, but it's taken this long for the genre's breakthrough hit to finally emerge. But World of Warcraft is indeed that game.
No, and by the way, you don't want to do that either. You think you do, but you don't.
I personally had a private investigator hired to track me down by a legal firm that represents Blizzard. The amount of pressure that Blizzard put on the Nostari's team was immense.
Past week or so, I've been investigating with people what's going on at Elysium because there's been some fishy, shady shit. And all week I've been called a drama llama. I need to get out of my mom's basement and get a wife.
Turtle WoW, the most popular WoW private server, is officially shutting down due to the lawsuit from Blizzard.
What made them this way? What is the attraction? What keeps us fascinated? This is the story of the World of Warcraft private server community. The development and history of World of Warcraft is something that's been analyzed and archived many times, and it really speaks for itself. One of the most legendary games of all time. When it hit store shelves in 2004, it swept the world, and it served as many people's first interaction with social media. However, in its wake was a community that was so impactful that it would eventually help steer the development of the game. And yet, despite this, it's received far less of the spotlight, and the direction it helped steer to was the past. The private server community of World of Warcraft is as old as World of Warcraft is itself, and much like Blizzard's Giant, it's a story filled with high highs, low lows, dramatic spectacles, and otherwise interesting moments. So join me today as we take a trip into the relatively unknown world of World of Warcraft private servers. Just hang on a second, though. I'm just finishing up a dungeon run here. Oh my god, no way. It's a signature epic quality ring by Patrick Adair Designs, the sponsor of this video. Patrick Adair Designs is a jewelry brand that makes handcrafted rings, pendants, and bracelets using some pretty wild materials. Glowstone, meteorite, dinosaur bone, opal, and a bunch of other stuff that it sounds like it would drop from a raid boss. This is my own ring that I custom made myself. I think maybe I got a Draenei jewel crafter for this one. It's got some arcane crystal in there, some Azerothian diamond maybe. The pieces are quite unique as they aren't mass produced. They're actually handcrafted by those who maxed out their jewel crafting skill, and you can customize your own ring with different materials, colors, finishes, personalized engravings, and much more, and make something that feels really personal to you. They also send out free sizing kits with your order before your piece is crafted, so you can make sure that it'll fit right, and they also back their rings with a perfect fit guarantee and a lifetime warranty. And for a limited time, they are running a site-wide buy one, get one free summer sale, which you can mix and match across any design or product on the site, so you don't have to get two of the same thing. So, scan the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description at patrickadairdesigns.com/MadSeasonShow and shop the sale. The year is 1999, and work begins on what would become one of the most influential games of all time. As was the case with all MMOs before and after, the development was rife with hurdles and obstacles to overcome, and they were large enough that a veritable army of testers were required to help shape the game into a finished state before it saw public release. It would officially enter its internal alpha testing in the spring of 2003, and although Blizzard had plans to eventually open up testing to the public, the floodgates were first opened just a crack for two reasons. For one, they didn't want to bite off more than they could chew, and for two, they had a fear that their hard work would be maliciously shared to outside parties. As it turned out, their fears were not unfounded, as they were realized shortly after testing began. Many today are surprised to learn that the private server community existed during a time before Cataclysm, and even more surprised to learn that the birth of private servers started before the game was even released in 2003. The origins have been traced all the way back to a person known as Skull, who through some social engineering was able to obtain the alpha client either from an internal alpha tester or even a Blizzard employee. With the birth of the World of Warcraft private server community on the horizon, the following message was posted around gaming forums across the web. Open source proponents, crackers, and anarchists alike rejoice, as an alpha version of World of Warcraft has allegedly been secured and is now supposedly making its way around Weir's circles. This news comes from Skull's hack site, who says that Warforge, infamous for their work in Battle.net emulation for War 3 and TFT betas, is already working on server software for the WoW leak. Availability for those outside of cracking groups is limited at best, and the situation has just now grown past rumor, but details and screenshots can be found here and here if you wish to judge it for yourself. And so, the floodgates were opened, and Blizzard was pissed, and they posted the following in response. As many of you know, we are currently conducting an internal alpha test for World of Warcraft. Our goal for this alpha test is to provide the best possible experience for players when the beta launches in early 2004. In order to accelerate the testing process, we recently allowed a small group of external testers to play the game, and during this process, a collection of files was leaked to the internet. While these files contain alpha content from the game, they're not fully playable and therefore do not convey the experience that World of Warcraft will provide when it is released. We are currently investigating this matter, and we will take serious action against those involved. As always, we appreciate the interest and enthusiasm that players around the world have for World of Warcraft, and we look forward to delivering a massively multiplayer game unlike any you have ever experienced. Until then, we ask that you refrain from sharing any content that doesn't come directly from Blizzard Entertainment. Once it was released, Pandora's box was opened, with private servers now emerging alongside Blizzard's giant. It would slowly grow into this increasingly influential force on the development of World of Warcraft moving forward. A person named Lax began reverse engineering the game with nothing more than a couple of packet logs, and he and another person named Cold Ice created the Stormwind Sandbox, which set the stage for all future emulation projects. And as a result, the first World of Warcraft private server predated the release of World of Warcraft itself. These people became something of celebrities and grandfathers of emulation, in particular Lax, whose legacy was archived through the form of cringe online poetry.
Once upon a time there was Lax, the father of World of Warcraft emulation. He said, "Let there be code." And then it was created. The World of Warcraft emulation scene. 2 years have passed since the mortal race has banded together to emulate World of Warcraft. But the alliances have been broken, and drums of flaming thunders once again.
But regardless of all of this, November 2004 eventually came, and along with it, one of the most iconic games of all time. It would quickly turn the MMORPG genre from niche to mainstream. It coincided with the rise of social media, as millions soon joined the addiction sweeping across the world. Behind the scenes, the private server community was still developing, as they had started working on spells, pathfinding, and more. But while World of Warcraft was reaching millions of paid subscribers, these private servers were quite humble in comparison, reaching just a couple hundred of free players, which was still quite impressive, all things considered. Working off of the base of the Stormwind Sandbox, The first emulator that was considered to be serious was called Stormcraft, which was soon followed by many others. There was Rift, Future WoW, Team Python, Chaos, Vibe, WoW Daemon. Their lifespans were short, as at this stage they were hardly playable. They often didn't have mobs, they had game-breaking issues that Blizzard had fixed months ago. To call them playable was quite a generous use of the word, and at this stage they often wouldn't really attract players as much as they would attract other independent developers wanting to evolve the community and iterate off of each other. And so, because of this, they would either fail to attract enough players to make it worth continuing, or they would become popular enough to be subsequently shut down by Blizzard. Eventually, things would fizzle out with Stormcraft as team members slowly lost interest, making way for new servers that slowly built off of each other. Rift would add chat functionality to the game. Team Python added items, vendors, mounts, flight paths, abilities, and more. Next was Chaos, which created the infrastructure with which to log in. They also added mobs, and they were quite effective in evolving private servers until they were shut down by Blizzard. Blizzard in these early years were extremely active in hunting and shutting down these private servers. But with each group building off of each other and sharing their code and methods, it would slowly but surely and inevitably grow into a more and more playable state. However, although there were instances of these communities and teams working together, infighting and egotism would also be common due to the limited player base. Competition between these servers was intense. An emulator called WoWEmu rose from the ashes of a recent shutdown of WoW Daemon, and as they worked privately on reverse engineering the game, a group called Blizz Hackers would crack their code and release it publicly, which eventually led to WoWEmu stopping entirely out of protest.
Screw you guys, I'm going home.
While not long after, Blizz Hackers themselves would also be tracked down by Blizzard's legal team and similarly disbanded. So it was essentially a free-for-all PvP server, and these early years were quite chaotic as the spectacle around the game only grew. While this was going on, vanilla World of Warcraft was thriving, and all the while moving forward. And on October 28th of 2005, after much anticipation, the first expansion for the game, the Burning Crusade, was announced, promising new content such as zones, dungeons, raids, arena, new races, and much more. The game coasted along until the day of release eventually came on January 16th, 2007, and it was met with great success and acclaim, as the expansion todays look back on fondly. But with it came an end to something quite special, as it was at this point is when the base version of the game became known as Vanilla World of Warcraft. This was a critical moment, not only for Blizzard, but also for private servers, as there was now officially a void that would grow ever so slightly over the years of this demand of Vanilla World of Warcraft not being met. Just like Blizzard, private servers would continue their development, and they slowly started to become more and more advanced. Although the scripting was entirely inaccurate, the loot tables were inaccurate. At this point they actually had mobs, and major bugs and exploits were finally being addressed as the servers had started to approach a relatively playable state. This would manifest in the form of what was the first substantially populated server, WoWscape, which interestingly wasn't based off of vanilla, but instead, in the new expansion, the Burning Crusade, under the umbrella of Scape Gaming, they had reached a staggering amount of players, with records indicating over 30,000 in a single day, and by June of 2008, over 400,000 accounts created within the community. You might be asking where these numbers came from? Well, it was popular and lucrative enough that it was the first server that Blizzard actually engaged a lawsuit in 2008 to get it shut down. Its popularity wasn't the only thing that made it an appealing target for litigation, as it also happened to be a multi-million-dollar business, with its owner raking in millions of dollars over its short 2-year lifespan. WoWscape was monetized as egregiously as Blizzard monetizes their own game today, selling pretty much anything and everything that exists in the game, whether that be gold, gear, levels, characters, and even items that didn't exist. They would make custom-made item sets available for purchase for hundreds of dollars. They tried to legally circumvent this by labeling the purchases as donations to keep the servers running, and if you would make a purchase, a GM would teleport you to a private room, confirm the transaction, and then insert the items into your inventory. The server would mimic Blizzard's updates throughout the following months, with the owner, Peyton, enthusiastically reminding community members to donate at the end of every update post made on the forum. This would go on for years until, finally, the chickens came home to roost in 2009, where Blizzard, after a lawsuit, was awarded $88 million in damages, as well as the server being forced to shut down. As dramatic as it was, it also sent up a flare within the community, and it raised a lot of eyebrows, as for many, the motivation for running these servers had started to become monetary in nature, which only further increased tensions within these communities, as players were no longer guests, they were commodities. At this point, with more at stake, DDoSing and other forms of sabotage, which were already present, accelerated as server runners would see lucrative potential in providing a server for Blizzard refugees, even decades later. Things would continue like this until another critical moment. On August 21st, 2009, Blizzard would announce the third expansion for the game, The Cataclysm. After much anticipation, the leader of the Black Dragonflight, Deathwing, was back, and as he would reshape the world itself, Blizzard would reshape their entire game. Old zones would be renovated, classes would be homogenized even further, as would loot. Many RPG elements core to the old versions of the game were removed. From top to bottom, Azeroth, as players knew it, was getting a complete makeover. It was also at this point in all of its history that they had reached their peak in subscriptions, an astonishing 12 million, but as it would soon turn out, shortly after, for the first time since its release in 2004, they had started to lose subscribers, and it wasn't really due to another big MMO entering the scene and taking players away. Rather, it just seemed that players had simply begun to lose interest. This would prove to be a pivotal moment, not just for Blizzard, but also, of course, for private server communities as well, because it was at this point is where the distance between the current version of the game and its vanilla origins took a tremendous leap. Old Azeroth at this point and many of its supporting RPG features were now lost forever, and there were now many who yearned to relive the old vanilla version of the game in the only place that still offered it, private servers, which had started to see a surge in popularity. A few servers emerged as the frontrunners, such as Vanilla Gaming in 2009 and Phoenix in 2010. Although the servers had come a long way from their origins, they still had a host of issues in its scripting, mob pathing, loot tables, damage values, dungeon events were missing, and there were many quests that required GM intervention to complete, as the scripting of the game just wasn't quite there yet. Beyond game issues, cheating was rampant, hackers were abundant, as were bots, as well as obvious corruption, where GMs would generate items for players in exchange for real-life money, much like WoWscape before it, but instead behind closed doors. And beyond this, there are also cases where they would ban people, not because they really broke any of the rules, but because they simply didn't like them. But they still offered something that Blizzard wasn't at the time, vanilla World of Warcraft. And as retail would continue in a direction further away from the 2004 hit, these private servers would only grow in popularity, with each new release eclipsing the last. Phoenix in particular, many people know as one of the major servers of the era, launching shortly after Cataclysm's release, and serving players for over a decade, and kind of broke new ground in terms of population. This was many people's first experience with private servers for the game, and like with previous servers, it did suffer from its share of controversies, as administrators were often credibly accused of selling in-game items and gold to individual players. Regardless, it was clear. Despite the fact that these private servers weren't effectively advertised en masse, and despite the major issues with glitches, bugs, corruption, and infighting, people were still finding them and playing them. They were very much going out of their way, often to pretty sketchy third-party websites in order to play past versions of the game, and for vanilla in particular, there's just something about it that was just magnetic and timeless. This is where private servers would transform from an annoyance to Blizzard to being influences on the development of their game in major ways. Although these private servers offered a technically playable experience, there were still those who were unhappy with their quality, or they were unwilling to go to a third party, and so the only option left was to campaign Blizzard. They thought, if these servers can be run independently by all of these random groups, why can't Blizzard make them? Clearly there's a demand for them. And so, around this time, it started to become more and more frequent that people would request not only a vanilla version of the game, but also of its past expansions, which had also started to be explored more within the private server community. This would create something of a faction war within the Blizzard community. Vanilla versus current. You had fans who had become jaded, and they disliked the more modernized version of the game, versus those who dismissed these gripes as nostalgic and misguided. As for Blizzard themselves, they would also disregard these pleas and remain quite firm that either it was impossible to do, as they didn't have the code anymore, or the players were confused and they didn't know what they were asking for, something that would be parroted many times, as the current faction would create this copy-paste called the Wall of No, containing several paragraphs of why vanilla servers would never happen, and why that's a good thing, so we can get awesome expansions like, BFA and Shadowlands and stuff. The whole thing got insanely petty, as internet nerd fights often are, and the community had begun to split in a substantial way, and any discussion surrounding vanilla servers would quickly devolve into flame wars and toxicity.
Have you ever thought about adding servers for previous expansions as they were then?
No. And by the way, you don't want to do that either. You think you do, but you don't. Remember when you had to spam cities and say need a tank, need a tank, need a tank during the Burning Crusade days? You don't remember that because
in
now you just push a
2013,
button that
things
says go
had
to the
reached
dungeon.
something of a climax. During a Q&A panel for an upcoming expansion, the Warlords of Draenor, a fan asked the developers on the possibility of vanilla servers.
No.
It was quite clear. The developers themselves had become annoyed, and maybe even insulted, by the players' wishes to play what they dismissed as archaic and inferior. Come on, what's wrong with this game? This expansion's going to be our best one yet. The answer was something that the vanilla player base had become accustomed to. It was dismissing and condescending, but more importantly, it would also serve as a rallying cry of sorts, and some point towards this moment as the most pivotal for the private server community. This would manifest in the mid-2010s with a variety of private servers, such as Chronos, Nostalrius, and many more, attempting to emulate the 1.12 patch as closely as possible, while at the same time avoiding the temptation of tainting the experience with cash shops like the previous servers had done. At this point, the retail version of the game had become quite heavily monetized, which made it unappealing for a certain percentage of the player base, so it became more and more important for the community to have a server that's uncorrupted with RMT. So all of this, combined with being timed well, was enough to set new records of activity. The server still had major issues, largely due to hosting such a large player base at this point, such as rollbacks, raid IDs resetting after the servers crash, and other pretty impactful glitches. But yep, people played, and Nostalrius in particular rose to the top, reaching a record-breaking 800,000 registered accounts, which was an absolutely astronomical number that no server had even come close to reaching. However, unfortunately for Nostalrius, their success ended up being their downfall, as they had become popular enough to attract the attention of Blizzard, who would send them a cease and desist, as well as detectives knocking on their doors in late hours of the night.
I personally had a private investigator hired to track me down by a legal firm that represents Blizzard. He called numerous people in my life, including my employer, my owner of my company, to confirm information about me so he could serve me papers at 10 p.m. on a Wednesday night, slamming and knocking on the door, freaking the crap out of my wife, and waking up my baby daughter in the next room.
Under the threat of lawsuit in 2016, they were forced to shut down, which would only fuel the flames. The player base was irate, because the situation was as follows. Blizzard refused or wasn't able to produce it. They dismissed players who wanted it in a condescending way, and they're now actively shutting down the people who were providing it. Although they were, of course, 100% within their legal right to do so, the private server community certainly wasn't too happy at this moment. They'd go on to sign a petition for Blizzard to finally recreate a vanilla version of the game, as there was an obvious market for it, and it would reach hundreds of thousands of signatures. They continued to apply pressure. Blizzard would respond with the suggestion of what they called pristine realms, which would be different rule sets of the current game, which was Legion at the time, such as turning off all level acceleration bonuses such as heirlooms, boosts, disabling the WoW token, as they had felt that these services damaged the original design philosophy of the classic game. Hold on to this thought, because it becomes very important later on. This too was not received well, as the old world would still be missing, as it was post-Cataclysm era. The class balance would still be current, as well as a plethora of other retail design philosophies that would negatively impact vanilla. It was seen as a half measure. However, as the saying goes, there must always be a Lich King, and at this point other servers would come in to serve the displaced player base. Chronos would relaunch as Chronos 2, providing the same experience as Chronos 1, but just a fresh relaunch and a new start for the refugees from Nostalrius. But behind the scenes, throughout all of this friction, there was some interesting news, as after Nostalrius was shut down, Blizzard had actually invited some of the staff to their headquarters in California for a meeting. No one knew what was said in this meeting. Some speculated legal proceedings, and some of the more hopeful people anticipated a big announcement in the near future, as it was quite a momentous occasion with Blizzard to actually extend a hand out and work directly with private server groups. Beyond the front of retail World of Warcraft, however, yet another controversy was brewing within the private server community, and it would be one that would forever shake the trust of the players and question the motivation of administrators who claim to operate on the principles of a pure love for the game.
Past week or so, I've been investigating with people what's going on at Elysium, because there's been some fishy, shady shit. And all week I've been called a drama wama. I need to get out of my mom's basement and get a wife, all of that. And today I guess we can prove those people wrong. But he was an admin on Elysium, and he was corrupt. And now here's the interesting part I want to talk about, guys. This is why the battle is won, but the war isn't over.
Although Nostalrius was the most popular vanilla private server during the time, it certainly wasn't the only one, and from its ashes arose Elysium. At that year's BlizzCon in 2016, Nostalrius urged players to bring up private servers in the Q&A sections in order to put more pressure on them to release an official vanilla server themselves. Surprisingly, this did get a response from Blizzard, although it wasn't what they were hoping for, as they stated ahead of time on social media that they wouldn't be discussing it. Now rebuffed, this would cause Nostalrius to actually send out their source code and player character data and account information to Elysium to effectively serve as a massive transfer to keep them going in spirit. Already on the precipice of deep legal trouble, it's believed that Blizzard responded swiftly and aggressively, as shortly after, Nostalrius quickly changed their tune and were like, oh, whoa, hang on, actually. If Elysium could maybe just not do that, please, that would be great. However, with the massive void now in the private server community and the potential to take the crown right in front of them, Elysium was essentially like Gondor in Lord of the Rings, where, he takes that shit when they're supposed to throw it in the volcano. I don't know. I watched that movie once, like 10 years ago. I don't really remember what happened. But in an interesting plot twist, tensions arose between the two, and Elysium said that 52% of the accounts from Nostalrius switched over, but Nostalrius replied saying that only 10% switched, and in kind of a competition, Elysium also released their own source code in a show to allude that they didn't need Nostalrius's help because theirs was more soundly developed, I guess. Petty squabbles aside, though, for the player base, it became the next home for vanilla. Nostalrius had become the martyr, and Elysium became the project to carry on the torch. Thousands of players rallied under its banner, guilds reformed, leveling zones filled up, and the community, despite everything, kept going. But behind the scenes, things were not as they seemed. As tensions between players and Blizzard were at an all-time high, Elysium rallied behind the fact that they were the good guys doing this for the love of the game, and That was kind of the whole pitch. Blizzard had not only abandoned vanilla, but they were the bad guys hunting down the poor, wholesome private server groups, and these volunteers, developers, and community figures were preserving it. However, this image would begin to crack when accusations started swirling around involving two of Elysium's administrators, Shenna and Krog. The allegations were quite severe, that these people with high-level access to the server were selling gold, they were spawning and selling characters, copying high-ranking PvP characters, they were doing deals with gold sellers behind the scenes, and interfering with and obfuscating the logs that would have exposed what was going on to other administrators of the server. So, these people who were supposedly running this pure community-driven passion project were being accused of running the exact kind of real money trading operation that many players had grown to dislike about modern World of Warcraft, and was the very reason that they joined private servers in the first place. One of these early accusers was a content creator known as Alex Sensual, who's a controversial figure within the World of Warcraft private server community. He would make videos producing evidence supporting his claims of corruption, which would receive a very hostile reaction from the community. Most would simply dismiss him as attacking the project for attention and trying to unnecessarily stir up controversy. But as suspicious as it was all left up for speculation until there was something of a coup within the development team, where inside staff revealed that there was indeed gold selling, the selling of high-level characters, rank 14s, the unbanning of accounts for cash. There were unsuccessful attempts to delete the logs of all of this. Some damning chat logs came out, and supposedly there was also some alleged skimming of money from player donations that were advertised to be used to solely cover the cost of hosting the server. Shenna would reply in an emotional, expletive-laced rant in a post titled, "You want transparency? Here it is." She would defend the project, proclaiming that all of this was false, and ultimately to, quote, trust them or fuck off. It was deleted shortly after, as the community would refute her. The rogue developers would then split off and make a copy of Elysium, and called themselves the Light's Hope Project, hosting copies of Elysium servers at first, before later relaunching fresh with a server called Northdale in 2018, as the communities picked up the pieces of yet another controversy. So, in essence, it was a complete train wreck. Kind of like a Game of Thrones episode, except everybody has autism. And at this point, there was such a spectacle surrounding it that the entertainment value had started to shift away from actually playing the game to watching these various controversies unfold. And it was also during this time that the game's expansion started to get some more traction. These had existed for many years in the private server scene at this point, but with the exception of WoWscape very early on, they remained relatively niche compared to the main attraction, which was vanilla. There was another group called Warmain, which saw respectable success as well. This one was monetized, however, it was in a way that was out in the open. The servers had queues in order to get in, which you could circumvent by paying for a premium account. There was also a cash shop, or donation shop, as it's always labeled in private servers, and they would see interest in not only the vanilla version of the game, but also on their Outland server, which was based around the Burning Crusade. Then, as was common within the private server community, a usurper came and challenged the throne. Felmist/Gummies was an upcoming Burning Crusade private server that essentially promised the world, including being 99% scripted, 4 years of development behind it, no monetization, and low latency for US-based players, as the servers would be hosted in the United States. The controversy here was the latter. On one hand, it was appealing, as at this point, private servers were historically hosted across the pond in places like Russia, as they're legally harder to reach for the California-based Blizzard Entertainment, although they aren't completely immune. Hold on to that thought, it becomes important later. But people planted their banners, either Warmain or Felmist. They squabbled on community websites such as Reddit. It became one of the most highly anticipated private servers during the time. It launched, and within 5 hours they announced that it was going to be shut down after a cease and desist letter from Blizzard Entertainment. Or at least that's what they claimed. There's a theory that it was faked to get out of it, as they'd kind of bit off more than they could chew. There's also another controversy, as there was a hidden Felmist server that allowed a select few chosen people to play. Yeah, a private server, but things eventually fizzled out as yet another blow had been dealt to the private server community. However, meanwhile, in the background, something was stirring at Blizzard Entertainment.
And I want to talk about ice cream. Ice cream is great. Ice cream is one of my favorite desserts. Personally, I love chocolate and I love cookies and cream. Cookies and cream is actually my all-time favorite dessert. But I understand that for some of you, your favorite flavor is vanilla.
On November 4th, 2017, 13 years after its initial release and 1 year after the Nostalgia shutdown, at that year's BlizzCon, J. Allen Brack, the same developer who in 2013 dismissed the fan for asking for vanilla servers, announced the existence of World of Warcraft Classic. After finding the backup of a backup from an ex-employee, they had found some critical data that they said was stopping them from making Classic, and so the team had begun to work on it. The release would work as follows. It's vanilla World of Warcraft with the old world, the old quests, class balance as it was in the final patch 1.12, with some progressive content releases to roughly mirror the original cadence of updates, such as Battlegrounds, Dungeons, and raid releases for the most major, as well as item and recipe changes for the more minor. They would advertise all of the charm of vanilla, and also the lack of features that conflict with it, such as dungeon finders, raid finders, and perhaps most importantly, microtransactions. The fanbase erupted. After over a decade, Official Classic was going to be a thing, which was great for Blizzard fans, but not the best news for private server fans, as one of their main draws was the fact that Blizzard wasn't offering the original experience, and so with Official Classic on the horizon, many would slowly shut down due to a lack of interest. However, when one door closes, another one opens, and it did usher in a new era for the private servers. Classic Plus. Many players got what they wanted, the Official Classic, which was eventually bastardized with gameplay destroying monetization, which they promised would not come. Told you so, by the way. But the vanilla experience came and went, and there were two directions that Blizzard had open to them. They could either continue down the original line of expansions, such as the Burning Crusade, Wrath, and so on. This was the safe option, as just like with vanilla, the private server community had already shown that there was a demand for recreations of these past expansions, particularly the first two. Or alternatively, they can make Classic Plus. Although no one can really agree on exactly what it is, there are some generalizations that you will commonly see when people discuss it. Collectively, for the most part, it's to stay in the old world, the Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor, often at level 60, and content and updates are added in the spirit of vanilla, such as new dungeons, raids, sometimes classes, class balance changes, new professions, quest zones, battlegrounds. Popular suggestions include content that the original developers had planned, but had scrapped due to time constraints or saved for re-envisionings and later expansions. As history showed, Blizzard would opt for the safe route, and they just went down the line of expansions once more. As of this video, they're in Mists of Pandaria, which was one of the expansions that created the desire for Classic to begin with, and the extremely low population reflects that. Who would have thunk it? Oh yeah, I did. And a side effect to this is that they once more left this void, and they were failing to provide a game mode that was in high demand, which opened the door once more for these private servers to step in. There have been a few different entries, the most popular of which were Turtle WoW and Ascension, launched in 2018 and 2016 respectively. Turtle and Ascension, over the course of about a decade, carved out their own little communities within the Classic Plus scene, providing what was described earlier, new zones, dungeons, raids, professions, and so on. Both of these servers, like their predecessors, were fairly monetized, operating on the same donation system first used by WoWscape, where users donate for account services, quality of life, and also character power, using the term donation in order to jump this legal hurdle to try to stay out of Blizzard sites. slowly but surely, especially as Official Classic exited the golden era of the game with Cataclysm. These Classic Plus private servers would only grow in popularity. Turtle in particular became extremely popular, so much so that their hubris kind of got the better of them and they started poking the bear in snarky social media posts. Eventually, like many others before them, they grew big enough that Blizzard would send them a cease and desist letter threatening legal action if they failed to comply. Despite the precedent set by WoWscape many years earlier, they ended up ignoring the letter, which resulted in Blizzard launching an official lawsuit against them, even going as far as to cite a RICO charge, as they alleged that Turtle WoW was this international crime organization. They went on to say that they've generated millions of dollars through their donation system, and in a plot twist of the century, it was alleged in the lawsuit by Blizzard that Torda, the administrator of the server, was Shenna, the controversial figure from Elysium who was allegedly involved with selling gold characters and skimming donations. Turtle WoW would initially stand their ground, telling their community that they were there to stay, and they continued to roll out new content patches, and they also made a public letter to kind of reach out to Blizzard to come to some sort of compromise where they could work together. Many were quite optimistic, believing them to be immune since many of the employees in the server itself were located outside of the United States and therefore out of Blizzard's reach. However, this ended up not being true, as eventually Blizzard was able to put enough pressure on them, resulting in Turtle WoW announcing their shutdown. With Turtle WoW now out of the picture, Blizzard would then set their sights on Ascension WoW, who also ignored the preemptive cease and desist letter. The lawsuit contains many of the same fixings as Turtle WoW, with the main difference being is that many of the employees, including, as Blizzard alleges, the masterminds behind the server, being located in the United States, so the protections that ultimately weren't enough for Turtle WoW exist even less for Ascension, and it's not looking too good right now. They haven't made any public statements and have continued releasing updates about the game, much like how Turtle WoW is doing, but it's widely believed that it's only a matter of time before the announcement is made that it too is shutting down. In the midst of this, presumably because Blizzard is sending out cease and desists left and right and witnessing the fate of Turtle WoW, more and more private servers have also announced their closure, and it's believed pretty widely by the community at this point that they're being quite active with these lawsuits due to an upcoming announcement of Classic Plus at this year's BlizzCon in 2026, which if true would mimic the situation in 2016, with Nostalrius being shut down shortly before the announcement of Official Classic. And that is the rough history of World of Warcraft private servers, from lawsuits to shutdowns, corruption, donation shops, stolen code, fractured teams, rampant egos. It's about as messy and as dramatic as the history of Blizzard and World of Warcraft itself. However, as controversial as it is, it's also fascinating. It's always been more about than just piracy and playing the game for free. For many, they're their own online microcosms gathered around a game that they loved, but no longer existed commercially. They've certainly had their share of bad actors, but there were and still are many who simply love the world of Azeroth enough to spend years reverse engineering it, preserving it, rebuilding it, and sometimes completely reimagining it. Beyond this, their longevity seems to be inexorably inversely proportional to their quality. The better they are, the more popular they become, which puts them into Blizzard's unmerciful sights. And when they do inevitably collapse, both the game itself and the community surrounding it are scattered to the wind and are left to pick up the pieces for the next Lich King that inevitably takes up the crown, even in increasingly more and more legally dangerous environments. They've served and will continue to serve as a testing ground for player desire. Long before Blizzard was willing to admit it publicly, these private servers proved that there was a demand for vanilla World of Warcraft, and they proved that there's demand for the Burning Crusade, then Wrath, then Classic Plus, and next, who knows? Their influence is obvious. The conversations around old world design, slower leveling, server identity, no dungeon finder, fresh realms, and even Classic Plus didn't appear from thin air. For years, these private servers were the unofficial focus groups that Blizzard simply couldn't ignore forever. So, from mobless sandboxes, to barely playable messes, to a home for those yearning for the past, and for those excited for a new and different future. The history of World of Warcraft private servers isn't clean, but it is meaningful, and it's a critically important part of the game's legacy, and it's changed its history forever.
Farewell for now, mortals. We hope you enjoyed today's video. See you again soon.